Hello everybody. My name is Joe Noriel. I'm from a group called History Connection. And History Connection obviously has to do with history, and we really focus on honoring people like Mr. Hanahan, who served our country and really went above and beyond. So I'm so happy that everyone could have me be here today in your just amazing facility, and big thanks to the staff and everybody who works here. It's just absolutely incredible. And it seemed the most appropriate day to have this presentation, December 7th. I think it's exactly. I think it's important for all Americans to remember days like December 7th and 9/11. It really is a time for us just to remain vigilant. And it was 72 years ago today, 2,400 men died at Pearl Harbor. They lost their lives in a surprise attack by the Japanese Empire. This tragic event galvanized a nation, and America went to war. Numerous lives were lost as the Japanese fought fierce battles in the Pacific, kamikazes raining down on our ships. And it was the Manhattan Project that ended the war and prevented a certain invasion of Japan, which would have meant the loss of thousands of lives. And I just recently learned that plans were actually being made, Operation Olympic, with 5 million troops were preparing for the invasion of Japan in the fall of 1945. So we're very honored to have Mr. Hanahan here today. And I also want to recognize in the audience Manny Lindbergh, another Manhattan Project scientist. So we've got two in one room. That's it. So to start the program, I want to introduce our first distinguished guest, and that's Marshall Davis, to share a bit of history on the project. After serving in the Korean War, Mr. Davis earned his PhD with research in nuclear chemistry, was employed at the Oak Ridge National Laboratory with an interest in military history. He went on to study all aspects of the Manhattan Project and the development of nuclear weapons during the Cold War. Mr. Davis.
Thank you, Joe. Yes, welcome. As you have probably heard, this effort to see if a weapon could be made out of nuclear energy ran from 1941 to 1945 with a successful culmination. However, I would like to start the story way back in about 1900, and I would like to describe to you how the scientists got interested in things nuclear, the nucleus of atoms. I would like to tell you how the nuclear physicists developed knowledge on the subject, and describe to you how the U.S. became the home base for an intensive research and development effort. And I will tell of the massive problems in technology and industrial capability that had to be resolved. So let's go back to 1900. Scientists in Europe had found in some measure of separation of things, they got an element that would glow when they got it in high enough concentration. And they named it radium, and it became popular as a thing to put in with paint and paint the hands of clocks and the numbers on clocks, and you could read them in the dark without turning on the light. And that was radium and the beginning of finding out there's something about some nuclei of atoms that makes this happen. Well, along with the ore that they were able to get this radium from was something else, and it also seemed to be emitting something, and the scientists labeled alpha particles, beta particles, and gamma particles. And this other something else had those elements emitting from it, and it would be a separate item in resolving the ore to get the radium out. But then they noticed something else. In with this element would be some other elements of about half the size. Now this gets back to the case that, of what am I talking about in size. Well, the chemists had started out trying to study the chemistry of the world, and found that hydrogen is the lightest element, and they gave it, and there's more reason to it than that, but they gave it, it's the number 1. And then they identified every element throughout our world and created this thing they call a periodic table of the elements, and they found it ran on down to element number 92, and that was uranium. And there was nothing else beyond that. I don't know why that stopped, but I'll have more on that later. Well, with this discovery that this other element, along with the radium, did something else. They found that if they would chemically analyze the product, there would be some elements that were about half the mass of that big heavy element. It happened to be uranium. And it looked like that element was splitting in two. And they gave that the name of fission. The fissure was in the nucleus in which it split and fell in two. So that was the beginning of the study of uranium, which became very intense in the scientific capitals of Europe, in France and in Germany. Well, we were getting up into the 30s now, after the radium and painting the clocks, and then the scientists discovering there was something else. And Adolf Hitler had become in power in Germany, and many of the scientists who were working in this area of physics had a Jewish connection, and they found that their families were being extricated from their homes and sent to these concentration camps, and several of them immigrated to the United States. And in fact, it spread around even into Italy, which was a faithful adherent to Hitler's cause through Benito Mussolini, and one very reputable physicist by the name of Enrico Fermi was in Italy. However, his wife was of Jewish heritage, and he decided he would not risk his family getting broken up by the Hitler connection, and he also immigrated to the United States and became a kingpin operator in studying if a weapon could be made from the fission of uranium. And this comes along to about 1939, when another physicist, Leo Szilard, escaped from Germany, came to the U.S., and he had a particular compulsion that knowing that Hitler and his German scientists were studying this process, and that they maybe would come up with this possibly horrendous weapon. And he wrote a letter, and with his colleagues had a path wishing to present this letter to our President, Franklin Roosevelt, that the USA ought to get going on this project and beat Hitler, get it before Hitler does, if it's something gettable. So Leo Szilard wrote this letter. He got with his other Nobel laureates. Kingly among them was Albert Einstein. They met. Dr. Szilard described his concern to Albert Einstein. Since he was a very notable fellow, he signed the letter, and they had another colleague who had a path into the White House, into the President Roosevelt, who carried that letter down and gave it to Franklin Roosevelt. Franklin Roosevelt right away put together a committee to study this thing and see if there was any possibility or probability that a weapon could be made, and what it would take to do it. Well, this committee was formed in 1941. They worked diligently to see what could be done, and whether it would work or not. Many huge questions technically. And in 1942, the committee received a focus in that the they decided they need a strong director of the program, and that got the appointment of then Colonel, come on, Colonel.
Oppenheimer?
No, his boss, Groves, Colonel Leslie Groves, to be director of this project. Now, and then, so Groves picked up on that job. I'll come back to him later. However, the group needed a place to work from. They were at several universities in this, from several universities in this opening period. And there was an Army Corps of Engineers North Atlantic District office in New York City on the island of Manhattan. So this group made a central office in the area where the North Atlantic Regional Army Engineer District was headquartered. And as pretty soon they were looking for a shorthand name for this group, and they says, well, we're in Manhattan, let's call it the Manhattan Project. And that sounded good. The key thing amongst this, in this operation, was it was absolutely top secret. So they couldn't give it a name that would give any indication of what they were doing. And the difference in the Manhattan Project, most of the Army regional districts governed things going on, engineering districts, things going on in their area. However, the Manhattan Engineering District covered the whole USA. And it had the teams there that had decided we're going to need a huge facility at Oak Ridge, and they had already selected Oak Ridge, Tennessee. They're going to need another huge one, and they had selected Hanford, Washington. And we'll need a place to get these Nobel Prize nuclear physicists together to see if they can make a bomb. And they built that way out in the country from Los Alamos, New Mexico. And so that was the beginning of the Manhattan Project. Now, looking at uranium, and the physicists had already found that the biggest source of this fission was an isotope. Uranium comes in two kinds. There's uranium, and they've measured it. Uranium with a mass of 235, and another one, atom with a mass of 238. And they found that it's the 235 mass that contributes to this voluntary splitting. And that if they're going to make a weapon, it would have to be the U-235 as the source. However, the U-235 was only 0.7% of the total uranium population. The 99.3 was U-238. So there became a technical issue of how can we separate these two? Well, the difference between 235 and 238 in mass is just a little over 1%. So it's not like you can shoot something down a thing that will pick the lightweight one, because if you do that, you get a pound of uranium and you get 0.007 pounds of U-235 out of it, which meant if they didn't know how much U-235 it would take to make the bomb, but guessing somewhere between 10 pounds and 100 pounds, it would mean you would have to get somewhere between 1,500 pounds and 15,000 pounds of uranium-235, which meant, you'd need 10 to 100, you'd need to process between 1,500 and 15,000 pounds of clean uranium. Now, the clean uranium only came about after you extracted the ore from the dirt and processed it to get the uranium out of the dirt, and then create the uranium metal, of which you might need up to 15,000 pounds. So it meant a huge process and tonnage of material to be handled. So there was, and then how would you separate the 235 from the 238? They're chemically identical. You couldn't do a chemical separation. The mass difference was 1%, so it would take a very meticulous device to sort it on mass. And there was some, there was a dilemma that Grove stepped into, General Groves, and one of his comments was he was given the challenge to get his Nobel physicists around, see if this thing could be made, how much it would take. He had to build an industry of phenomenal size, of meticulous capability, and nobody knew what they were going to get or if it would work, and he had to proceed in the forward direction to get it to happen, and he did. Well, all of this was so difficult, the question came up, is there any other way of doing it? Along about that time, nearby here, the University of California had a radiation laboratory in which they had some people by the name of Glenn Seaborg, Ernest Lawrence, and Mr. Perlman, who were studying these heavy elements down here. And in particular, Mr. Seaborg was somehow very interested in seeing if he could create even heavier elements. And Ernest Lawrence had developed a machine, a cyclotron, that could they could get atoms of any element and slam it into a sample of whatever they wanted to do. Well, Seaborg and Lawrence got together and says, well, let's take a big atom, smash another one into it, and see if they will stick and form something bigger than has ever been made before. And that Glenn Seaborg made his reputation doing that, and he had proceeded down that path up to, from uranium, created, which was a number 92, he had created neptunium and plutonium. And these were in microgram quantities, but they knew from the alpha, beta, gamma emissions that they gave that they had a new element, and they studied this plutonium in this micro quantity, and the nuclear physicists thought perhaps it would behave something like uranium-235. So we have a meticulous bunch of things to do that were extremely demanding, and there was a thought in the committee earlier on that they should pick one of these and go with it. However, the consensus was, if that's not the right one, we spend all our time is of essence, we have to start all over again, so we're going to work on all of them. And Groves, General Groves, directed with the friendship of his colleague, who he appointed in the name of J. Robert Oppenheimer, to get these nuclear physicists together and figure out how to do this. And not only were they presented with the challenges of separating the U-235 isotope from the more massive amount of U-238, but create enough plutonium, again maybe from 10 to 100 pounds, of an element that had never existed before. So with that, they built a laboratory at Oak Ridge, Tennessee, that was king in separating the uranium isotopes using 3 different methods, just whatever, see which would work and so forth. And they built a pilot plant there for the production of plutonium, which went in to support a massive project in Hanford, Washington, to have commercial-sized operation to create pounds of plutonium. And it was a challenge and a demanding project like science and industry has never known before. As we know now, it worked. And with the support of many laboratories, like at the University of California, at the University of Chicago, that studied the metallurgy, I mean, they had to figure out a way with these metals. They needed the pure metal. Was it machinable? In what way would it be machinable to make a very precise designed pieces to slam together and create this weapon. As they were working on it, of course, there lead to another anomalous events. Of course, on May 8, 1945, Germany succumbed to the Western powers and was defeated in Europe. And that meant, well, phew, he didn't get his bomb to save his neck, and we don't have it yet, but by May 1945, it was seen as a very doable thing. The scientists working on this project were so intrigued with the challenges of what they were doing, they wanted to go ahead and see it work anyway. However, there were a few that said, well, Hitler's gone, the German effort's gone, we can quit doing this and it'll be all right. And they had an attitude that maybe it's not right to use this bomb on Japan. And there was a sentiment expressed that way, but it didn't carry enough weight to stop the effort. President Harry Truman got the word of how many lives, American lives, would be lost trying to get Japan to surrender, involving an invasion of the Japanese mainland. And his opinion was if he can save American lives, he wants to go ahead and do it, or he would never live down with the American people that he had not done it. And so the effort went ahead and created these bombs that were tested on July 16th in the desert in New Mexico for the plutonium, which was a very complicated device. At Los Alamos, they found if they could get enough U-235 together, it was a no-brainer that if they could get it together, it was going to go off. And they did this with experiments there with U-235 as rapidly as the Oak Ridge laboratory could supply it to them. There are many, many details that go into what goes on there, but perhaps with that I can stop, Joe. We can move on with your program. If there's any other questions, we have some representatives here, Mr. Hanahan and Manfred Lindner, who worked intensely in the project. Myself, I just studied this in graduate school under a professor who had worked with Glenn Seaborg at Berkeley, and he got me a job at Oak Ridge National Laboratory for my first job, where I rubbed shoulders with people about 15 years later who had worked on the project. So with this, Joe, I appreciate the opportunity to share this with you.
Thank you. Thank you, Marshall. And with that, I would like to introduce our distinguished City Councilman and very special guest, Mike Harris and George Harris with me as well.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for putting this together, and thank you to Joe Noriel who put this together and all the other things he's doing with the History Connection, and thank you to Springfield to put this afternoon together to allow us to have this event here. It's my pleasure to be here on behalf of the City of Petaluma, along with George Harris here from Assemblyman Mark Levine's office, who will have a presentation after me. But it's my honor to read this proclamation from the City of Petaluma, honoring today, December 7th, 2013, as Donald Hanahan Day. And whereas in the fall of 1939, President Roosevelt was made aware of the possibility that German scientists were racing to build an atomic bomb, and was warned that Hitler would be more than willing to resort to such a weapon in his conquest of democracy. As a result, Roosevelt set up the Advisor Establishment of Manhattan Project, a predecessor of the United States Department of Energy. And whereas on December 7th, 1941, the Empire of Japan launched a surprise attack and bombed Pearl Harbor, and the United States immediately entered World War II. And whereas the victory by the Allies was not assured with the Nazi scientists developing superweapons, and Japan in control of the Pacific, and with the Manhattan Project on the brink of success in spring of 1945, the atomic bomb became an increasingly important element in American strategy to bring an end to World War II. And whereas, because of the generally accepted view that the Japanese would fight to the bitter end and a costly invasion of the home island seemed likely, American policymakers contended that a bomb of severe magnitude, could possibly lead to Japanese surrender without an invasion and should be used as soon as possible. And whereas Donald Hanahan participated in work essential to the production of the atomic bomb, therefore contributing to the successful conclusion of the war, and a grateful government provided their appreciation to Mr. Hanahan's effective service to his country by a certificate of appreciation by the United States of America War Department, Army Services Forces, and whereas although the scientific discovery of fission and use of radioactive materials have contributed to numerous positive applications that help and enrich our lives, it is hoped that the power and devastation of the atomic bomb is never forgotten and the nuclear technology is never needed to be utilized again in war. Now therefore be it resolved that David Glass, Mayor of Petaluma, along with the members of the City Council of Petaluma, do hereby declare December 7th, 2013 as Donald Hanahan Day in Petaluma to honor his impacts on science and history.
Wow.
There you go, sir. Thank you very much.
I'm supposed to say something. I hope you can hear me because my voice doesn't carry well. But anyway, I thought I'd go back and just briefly say what my involvement was. I came with the University of Chicago in about 1943, 44. And they were setting up a laboratory to study the possibility of making an atomic bomb. So this was quite a job. And so at first there was a fellow named Szilard, a physicist. He built a small pile and a football field stadium, Stagg Field in Chicago, and there he showed the possibility that you could make a radioactive compound that was very potent and didn't blow up the world. See, they were worried about the fact that when you get fission, you hit another, you could just go on forever, but it didn't. So we had that possibility. Now the other thing that happened at the University of Chicago was there were a lot of important people who came through there. Oppenheimer, Einstein, they all had fake names, but everybody in the place knew who they were, so it didn't matter. But anyway, Oppenheimer was exceptionally good, and so to say that we worked there, and we were working on microgram quantities. You may not be familiar with the term micrograms, but it's very small. So we would work with little tubes like this. And there was another fellow who was a friend of Dr. Lindner's, Lou Warner, and he was about 6'8", and I was about 6'4" at the time, working on this very small amount of radioactivity. So, but the thing that was exciting about it was that they were going to take that procedure that we may work out to isolate plutonium. And we did this. It meant that you'd go from the little atomic pile products and try to separate plutonium, and then that would give you, any one time, a luxurious yield would be about 1,500 kilocalories of energy. And what they needed at Hanford was something like 150,000. So the transformation of what we did on these small amounts to Hanford was a shot in the dark. They didn't know whether it was going to work or not. And but fortunately it did. And while we were there at the University of Chicago, they developed the metallurgical laboratories, and ultimately DuPont came into it because they had experience in working with large quantities of material. So what we did was we isolated and purified plutonium, and let's say it's microgram quantities, but anyway, then we used that process. They couldn't wait because Hitler was going so fast, and so they decided that we move the laboratory out to Hanford. Now, I don't know if you've ever been to Hanford, but it's not a gem of a place to live, I can tell you. But anyway, it was a lot of, I guess the city is about 20,000 people. But anyway, we got out there, and then you had these huge reactors where you put in uranium, if you want, 238 or 235, 238, and then they needed something to moderate, because when it goes through there, it causes further degradation, and it can go pretty fast. So they use finally graphite. And then the other thing was, what were we going to do to purify the plutonium? And so it so happened that we were working on a precipitation process, and that's as far as I can go on it, because it's special information, and they took it from that point right there, and they made it into these huge reactors, tremendous things. And that's the way they got the first bomb detonated, I think, was from Los Alamos, but it was also about some similar procedure getting plutonium. But plutonium was light years more important than U-235, and it was easier to prepare. So that's what we did. We got it together from micrograms to grams, and out at Hanford. And the other thing that's interesting about it is, of course, all this work had to be done in were special outfits, like people from Mars, and it was quite unique. And the interesting thing is, at the University of Chicago, if you go down to the dining room, and you could, if you were very crafty and went around the room, you could hear the atomic bomb procedures and stuff talked about. People couldn't, they wanted to talk about it. But at Hanford, security was really quite good. And so we had some tremendous people working. And the other thing that people don't realize, that you can only get together up to 400 grams of plutonium. Now that's a lot, but it will self-detonate. So they have to be very careful. And so we proceeded to use that to get the Hiroshima bomb and the Nagasaki. And at that time we didn't look bad, but you know, the thing is it'd be a very good idea not to have them again. But it was incredible. And so when they had the atomic bombs, like shortly thereafter they started to deactivate Hanford. And today I think it's just a ghost city. But it was an exciting period, and we met some great people, as I had met Oppenheimer and Fermi, Szilard, a number of people, and then General Groves. So we felt we had accomplished what we did. And now the details of the operations with Iran and the like is very interesting, because so many nations have it. Who's going to do what to whom? So I think just the fact that they could possibly be attacked makes them not be so active. So I want to thank the city of Petaluma for the proclamation, and I'll certainly make hundreds of copies of this. Yes, sir.
Well, how many hours a day did you spend in your hazard suit as you were working?
It would be three to 4 hours, and you'd be out. And the interesting thing about it is that they were so concerned about radioactivity, they'd have everybody check their white cells on Monday. Well, the white cell counts normally change over the weekend. You know, people go out and booze and have a good time and stuff. And so they take them off for a day. But it was about 3 hours. That's a good point. Yes, sir.
What was the most difficult challenge you had to overcome to reach the goal you guys were going for?
Well, I think number one is to getting a uranium source. It was not that available. That was one. And then to get a moderator that would work well. There were several they tried, and they found that graphite would do the thing. And this moderator, as you get a reaction in these molecules, they get neutrons, and they keep multiplying. So they get these lattice structures, and this would control the reaction.
I want to add one more piece of congratulations here. I know you have the city of Petaluma and the United States, so the thing that's missing is the state of California. And I'm here representing Assemblymember Mark Levine, and thank you very much for your contributions. As somebody who's young, it's great for me to meet a piece of history, and we very much appreciate what you've done to keep us all safe.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I don't think my head will be big enough to fit through.
Donald, I wonder if you can share your memory of when the bomb first went off. What were your feelings? And perhaps, Manny, would you mind sharing your feelings as well?
After you, sir.
Manny Lindner also worked on the Manhattan Project.
Well, I'm probably one of the last people on Earth to know that an atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima. Although I worked at the same site, the Hanford Engineer Works, as it was called. We were working feverishly to produce plutonium as fast as possible. Because Los Alamos kept saying, we need it, we need it, we need it. And so there was a big push to turn out large quantities, as much of plutonium as we could. And after our push was over, I said, gee, it's time. I have to take a vacation. I'd like to go up in the mountains and go backpacking. So 4 or 5 of us went backpacking up in the Cascades of north central Washington, and we were gone from about the 1st of August in 1945 to about the 7th or 8th. So we were gone for about over a week, just backpacking. We had horses with us to carry some of our stuff. It was beautiful, it was wonderful to get out. It's gorgeous mountain country. And when we came back, we stopped in a little restaurant. And there's an old, one of our fellows came up with an old paper. It was 3 days old. He said, look, atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima. So we didn't know about it until the 8th of August. There's something that we had been working on. We were just working on the production of, not on the bomb itself, but just on the production of plutonium. We had no idea that Hiroshima had been hit with an atomic bomb. So I carry with me to my grave the distinction that I'm probably one of the last people on Earth to know about the atomic bomb being dropped on Hiroshima. Something which I'm dubiously proud of.
And in fact, the city of Richland, Washington, was amazed too. They didn't know what was going on. But the interesting thing, if you don't know much about the reaction, it generates a lot of heat to produce plutonium. And so they wanted to get it someplace. What would they use? Heavy water, and, whatever. And they decided that water would be the most useful, and the best place was in the state of Washington, where the Columbia River comes down. So you think, when you see these reactors, they glow in the dark. And thinking about the temperature change in the water, and you'd see, my God, this must be killing all the fish down below, but it wasn't. And I think that the last figure I heard was that it rose, the rise in the temperature was 1/10 of a degree from the top of the start of the river to where it went through the reactors. So that was a good.
May I make a comment on that very respect? In my nuclear studies, I worked for a professor who had worked in the project, and he pointed out, of course, the Hanford and the plutonium production facility was located on the Columbian River because they had a lot of water to cool this, and it had to be a massive operation, a lot of heat generated. And his story was they extended the fence to the secure area upstream and down, well, especially downstream, for fear that a spy could take the temperature difference in the water, how much it was heated up, and through some calculations decide how many uranium-238 to plutonium-239 reactions had taken place and how fast we were getting material generated. Thank you, Joe.
Anyone have any other questions for any of the group here?
What was your cover story to the general public when you mentioned the lunchroom at the University of Chicago, but when you were at Hanford and they were kind of saying, what are you guys doing here? Did you have a kind of a cover
You just have to tell them that you're working on a secret project.
Just call it
It's as simple as that. It's like a Max comedy. We're working on it.
secret.
And it was a severe penalty if you disclosed any information. But it was difficult to keep from saying.
Let me make one more comment. Sometime, I think it's in January on PBS, which would be Channel 9, KQED in San Francisco in the Bay Area. There will be a documentary on the Hanford project, the construction of the site at Hanford on the Columbia River. I've seen a preview of it. It's very good, very down to earth, very understandable. And so if you want to keep your eye open for it will probably within a month or several months it will appear on public broadcasting stations around the country. So far it's only been shown in Oregon and Washington, but it will answer many of the questions that you might have that you can't think of right now, but you'll wish you thought of an hour from now. So watch out for the word Hanford, Hanford, F-O-R-D.
Question back there?
How did you physically, when the bomb was completed, how did you physically transport that bomb into an airplane that eventually flew over?
I tell you, when you find out, will you let me know?
Okay.
I have put together a reading list that Joe has some copies of, and amongst it are his books written that describe just that very effort.
Oh, okay.
And General Groves, in his most comprehensive book of the project entitled Now It Can Be Told, after being such an absolute secret, describes of the challenge of getting this bomb carried.
That's right.
When they didn't even know how big it was going to be yet. And he contacted Hap Arnold of the Army Air Corps, the Army Air Corps leader at that time. Hap Arnold selected one of his officers who had an outstanding reputation of bombing missions in Europe, who had completed his 25 missions or whatever it is, and come back home and was assigned to research and to finish developing this new big bomber that Boeing had created, the B-29. And this gentleman is Paul Tibbets, colonel, I guess, at that time. And Paul Tibbets was asked by Hap Arnold about his interest in getting assigned to a special project that might involve the B-29, and he accepted that. Now, one of the challenges was, if they couldn't make this thing fit in a B-29, England had developed two very fine, big, heavy bombers that could carry huge bombs, bigger than the B-17, which was our popular bomber at the time. And as General Groves describes it, what a horrendous defeat of Americanism to have to use an English bomber to drop our wonderful new weapon. Well, Paul Tibbets got together a team and went through the Boeing factory at Wichita and had some specially prepared B-29s, and they set up a training place at the edge of the Salt Lake Desert at Wendover, Utah. And he had his crew of 16 crews. He had coordinators coming from Los Alamos back and forth trying to update him on how big this bomb might be. And one of the constraints was, well, we're going to have to fit it in this B-29. So that became a parameter that the Los Alamos folks tried to work towards, and they made it. I might point out that the mission, then, Tibbets trained his people intensely. His description of his story is awesome in the effort that it took to get this team going. They then went to Tinian Island, and for a 1,500 mile trip to Japan and back, and have some reserve fuel, what they did, the B-29 had two big bomb bays. It could accommodate a bomb that was 10 feet long, which was one of their limitations. They were only going to carry one on a plane, and they put extra fuel tanks in the other bomb bay to provide them assurance of getting to Japan and back in case there was some mishaps. So it was a big effort, and it was combined between the bomb makers at Los Alamos and Paul Tibbets and his flight crew that were developing the skills to do the mission at Wendover, Utah. And it's very well described by Paul Tibbets in books that have the Enola Gay on the title. That was the name he gave his B-29, his mother's name. And I think most comprehensive is book that came out later called The Return of the Enola Gay, in which he describes in a lot of detail what they had to do.
Thank you. And could you leave a copy, ask the front desk to make a copy and have it left here? Okay. Thank you.
I also want to point out, Mr. Ottolini, would you like to share your quick summary of your experience with your history?
Yeah. My name's Harold Bagdonis. I'm the commander of AMVETS Post 40, Santa Rosa, and I served 20 years in the United States Air Force as a nuclear weapons specialist. So these gentlemen and I have something in common, but many generations later. It was a challenge for the Army Air Force to get those bombs loaded in the airplane. Number one, they didn't have a transport vehicle to carry anything that heavy to get it to the aircraft in the first place. So there was a challenge to build a trailer that they could mount the bomb on. Then they got it to the airplane, to the bomb bay. Then they had to figure out how to get it up in the bomb bay. So there was hydraulics involved there, and that was all hand-pumped hydraulics, the first one, which was an effort, but they managed, they succeeded. And I was very fortunate. My first assignment after all my training here in the States was to England, where they had the two bombs that were used, the similar ones, because they built more than the two. And it was our job to dismantle them and put them into retirement. So I was on the opposite end of them, not the end that ended the war, but the end that ended that particular series of bombs. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, I want to thank everybody for coming. Please get a chance to check out my website, www.historyconnection.net, for future programmings next year. And there's some great refreshments out here, so help yourself. And thank you again, Mr. Hanahan.
Light.